Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Carl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Well, packaging has always been really important for food businesses and generally viewed as a pivotal strategy for promoting their brand. However, with sustainable packaging materials proving to be increasingly popular and amidst more demands from consumers and retailers, it has never been more important to get packaging right. This week, IFAC published a report about emerging trends in packaging and how businesses can get it right. And here to tell us more is Lorcan Bannon, the Associate Director of Food and Agribusiness with IFAC. So Lorcan, what is IFAC and what services do you provide?
Okay, so many of your listeners might be familiar with the IFAC World Co-op that was set up in 1975. And we're a top 10 professional services firm that work with food and agribusinesses throughout the country. And we really help our clients, I suppose, to build sustainable businesses through compliance and accounts, but also through business plans. And from time to time, we do research. And one of those research topics that we've recently focused on is packaging.
And of course, Lorcan, it's a very topical area. I was reading something there recently from Love Irish Food, who said that food businesses are experiencing a 20% increase in the cost of packaging. Was that one of the reasons why you decided to go off and research this area?
Yeah, it's a really timely topic for us. I suppose every day we talk with our clients and increasingly costs and costs of packaging in particular are being referenced as challenges for our clients. So we spent the time to kind of dive into the topic, and we've really identified through the report that's available on our website, ifac.ie, both the challenges and the opportunities that packaging presents for food businesses in Ireland.
Let's talk about the challenges first. What are they?
Well, unfortunately, they're probably obvious enough. The biggest two challenges that were identified through the report were sourcing of materials, and that's had a knock-on effect from the likes of Brexit and COVID, but also the costs. So the unit cost to access traditional packaging materials has increased. And I suppose in the course of the report, we identify or highlight some of the case studies where, for example, Finnegan's Farm, a brand that some of your listeners might be familiar with, they actually ended up moving their sourcing of materials or suppliers from the UK as a direct result of Brexit because of just delays and increased costs were having a direct impact. They've sourced the material, the supplier locally, so an Irish supplier, which has meant that they're actually closer in terms of turnaround time, so there's less delays, and the pricing actually ended up being relatively close. So they've benefited, the local economy has benefited in that particular case.
And are Irish food businesses, in your opinion, taking an active approach, or is it something that they're very reactive to when retailers or the consumers are putting them under pressure?
Well, there's certainly a mix there, Carl. We would see some food business owners taking that proactive approach and recognising that packaging has the potential to be a sustainable differentiator. And in the report, we highlight brands like All Real Nutrition, and they're a really good emerging food business brand based in Kerry, and they've used packaging or sustainable packaging as a differentiator to stand out versus their competitive set. But equally, there are food businesses that we'd be aware of that that recognise that their costs in terms of packaging have increased, but haven't spent the time, unfortunately, to really understand that, and as a result, aren't sure what exactly they need to pass on to their customers and the end users.
And of course, in your report, you talk about a packaging audit. What does that entail? And typically, what costs are involved?
It's probably not as complex as it sounds, but it really does tie into that approach of taking a step back and taking the time to review what processes a business employs around packaging, what materials, what costs are currently being paid, are there better materials? So it's really just taking a step back, addressing some of those fundamental questions, seeing what team is in place and what branding is being used. Because like it or not, I suppose, food businesses in Ireland are getting squeezed from two sides. Consumers are looking, understandably, for more sustainably produced products, and packaging is part of that. But equally, retailers are starting to look for greater contribution from their providers towards net zero emissions. And Tesco were quite vocal, for example, on that last year when they announced their 2050 plans. But something else that we've started to see emerge actually is front of pack scores. So I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with Nutri-scores, or the nutritional scoring that would be on the back of most food products. But what started to emerge is front of pack scores, so eco scores, and that really starts to showcase and differentiate food brands that are spending the time to understand their sustainability and the impact that their packaging has.
That's a very interesting development. Another interesting development in this space, of course, is in terms of emerging materials in the packaging space. We've seen some companies moving to edible materials, seaweed-based materials, lab-grown materials. Provide us with an insight into what some of the more interesting companies are doing in this space across the country.
Absolutely. So in terms of emerging packaging materials, it seems like nearly every week there's a new material coming out. So that's exceptionally exciting for people involved in the sector. I suppose it does present challenges in terms of commercial viability. But the more companies that take the time to invest and explore these type of new materials, as you say, seaweed, lab-grown packaging, edible packaging, the more likely that these materials are going to become more accessible. And ultimately, one of the key elements of these is that their sustainability is there. So if you take that example of edible packaging, there's a company in Waterford, Signal Box Coffee, which have built up a nice little following or a reputation for their edible coffee cups. So if you think about it, you have the opportunity to enjoy your latte or your flat white, and then when you're finished, you get to eat the cup. So it's a win-win scenario. It's good for consumers, but it's good for the environment as well.
No, it's brilliant to hear, I have to say. Another area I do want to discuss with you this morning is blockchain packaging.
Yeah, so in terms of blockchain, it probably falls under the sector or the idea of packaging as a silent salesperson. So making your packaging or allowing your packaging to work harder from a marketing point of view. And blockchain technology, I suppose, has been around for a number of years. But in terms of packaging, what we're starting to see emerge is the use of QR codes on certain packaging materials, providing traceability. So the journey that food product or packaging product has taken through the life cycle of their production. And that really, I suppose, just adds that traceability and transparency to the product. So it's something we'd expect to see increasingly emerge over time.
And are you finding, Lorcan, that more and more of the retailers are looking deep within their supply chains, and they're the ones that are putting the pressure on these food businesses to become more sustainable when it comes to packaging?
There's definitely that bottom or top-down approach from a retailer through the food producer to the consumer. But as I mentioned earlier, food producers are somewhat in the middle of that mix, and they are getting that pressure from both sides. So there's a certain responsibility to react, but as I said earlier, there's also that opportunity to seize these rising trends. And food companies, as I said, like All Real, have invested quite a bit in biodegradable style packaging, which addresses that retailer's need, but also, as I say, plays into that consumer demand for more sustainability. So that's certainly something that we would see growing into the future, and it's clearly highlighted in the report that we've released this week.
We spoke about the retailer's influence over packaging, but what about the consumer influence itself? Is that being driven by the millennials and the Gen Zers, or is it actually working its way up through the age profiles?
Well, I think everybody has an interest in this, so it's a collective future that's at risk. So we would see an interest or an opportunity across all ages to engage with this. And I suppose what we've tried to do through this report is to highlight practical steps. So we mentioned the packaging audit for food businesses to really to use that kind of tool. But there's also packaging cost calculators that we've introduced, where for free businesses can understand the cost of their packaging and look to really incrementally improve their sustainability by introducing some of those emerging packaging solutions that we've mentioned. And collectively, consumers and food businesses can win in that scenario.
And for those food businesses that are laggards in relation to the move to sustainable packaging, is it the cost that's holding them back, or what is it, in your opinion, Lorcan?
Well, the reality is that any business owner, not to mention just food businesses, have a lot going on. There's an awful lot of macro factors at play. So packaging is just one of the things that's in their mindset. So understandably, food business owners don't necessarily have the bandwidth to engage with this. So that's one of the reasons we invest our time to release these kind of reports. So it short circuits the time that food businesses need to invest, hopefully identifies some of those emerging trends, some of those suppliers, and saves them the time that they wouldn't necessarily have.
And finally, Lorcan, how do our food businesses here in Ireland compare to their counterparts internationally when it comes to the move to sustainable packaging?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the sector is relatively emergent, as in there's a whole load of new packaging materials from a sustainable point of view that are coming out across the globe. We would rank relatively favourable in terms of our openness, but there is still an over-reliance on traditional materials when it comes to packaging. So there is that opportunity to engage with reports like this, to understand those emerging trends, and really take the opportunity to look to the future towards a more sustainable packaging solution.
And Lorcan, finally, your top tips for food business owners, or indeed any other business that's packaging or product here today?
I would suggest that they visit our website, that's IFAC, that's IFAC.ie, download a free copy of the report, and just spend some time, if you've got it over a coffee, potentially in an edible cup, and just try and take some of those suggestions and learnings that we've spoken about and bring them into their own businesses.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Lorcan Bannon from IFAC, and there's no doubt that the power of packaging has never been as strong.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Carl Fitzpatrick.